April 18, 1942. Pre-dawn gloom, somewhere in the North Pacific. The carrier USS Hornet heaves in a gray, angry sea 650 miles east of Japan. Spray lashes across the flight deck like thrown gravel. Wind claws at every loose strap and scrap of canvas. The deck isn't supposed to launch land-based bombers, but today, 16 twin-engined B-25B Mitchells crouch there, noses pointed toward the bow, their propellers ticking slowly, like predators waiting to pounce. Lieutenant Colonel James "Jimmy" Doolittle pulls his goggles down around his neck and squints into the darkness ahead. He's 55 years old, a test pilot, an engineer and a racing legend, and today he's leading something nobody has ever tried before. A land bomber, taking off from a carrier to strike the Japanese homeland. The Hornet lurches, the B-25's nose dips, then rises as the ship rides another wave. The white 52 stenciled on Doolittle's tail shivers in the wet wind. Beside the aircraft, crewmen in pea coats and cranials hunch over tie-downs and chocks. Every few seconds a wave slams the bow and sprays a curtain of icy water over the planks. This is already a gamble. Then the lookout shout knifes through the roar of the sea. "Enemy vessel, off the port bow!" Doolittle turns toward the bridge. On the horizon, a smudge. A Japanese picket boat has spotted them. The task force's element of surprise is gone. The original plan was to close to 400 miles. Now, at more than 600, they'll have to launch early. That means less fuel, less margin for error, maybe no way back. On the Hornet's bridge, Admiral William Halsey's message crackles over the loudspeakers. "Launch planes. To Colonel Doolittle and his gallant command, good luck and God bless you." The words ripple down the ship like a physical force. Men who've been pretending not to be afraid straighten up, swallow hard, and get back to work. On the flight deck, Doolittle climbs the ladder into the left seat of B-25 number 402344. The cockpit smells of oil, metal, and damp canvas. Beside him, co-pilot Lieutenant Richard Cole straps in, fingers moving fast over buckles and switches. "You really think this thing can get off this postage stamp?" Cole mutters, half joking. Doolittle glances at the runway ahead. It isn't a runway at all, just 467 feet of pitching deck, slick with salt water, ending in open ocean. The B-25 was designed for runways more than twice that length. Behind them, the other bombers sit nose to tail, each loaded with 4 500-pound bombs, their crews already strapped in, pilots, co-pilots, bombardiers, navigators, gunners, 80 men in all. "They said it couldn't be done," Doolittle says, almost to himself. "So, we'll do it anyway." Far across the water, on airfields in occupied China and the Japanese home islands, pilots of the Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service have their own opinions about American bombers. Slow, clumsy, too big to fight. In mess halls and briefing rooms, they've laughed over silhouettes of U.S. aircraft, the B-17 Flying Fortress, the B-18 Bolo, the B-25 Mitchell. Big, straight-winged machines, easy meat for lithe Mitsubishi A6M0s and nimble K-43 Oscars. The Japanese pilots are trained to close in, to slash through bomber formations with 20mm cannon and 7.7mm machine guns, shredding aluminum and fabric. In their eyes, heavy American bombers are targets, not threats. Today, they have no idea that 16 of those clumsy machines are riding the deck of a U.S. carrier pointed straight to Tokyo. Back on the Hornet, yellow-shirted deck officers step into position. Semaphore flags flash. The carrier turns into the wind, engines churning a frothing wake. The ship's bow rises and falls, as if testing how much courage its pilots really have. Doolittle checks his instruments. Fuel gauges, engine temps, manifold pressure. Below and behind him, the two Wright R2600 radial engines rumble, impatient. The smell of exhaust sneaks into the cockpit through every gap. Cole leans closer. "We're past the point of no return, sir." Doolittle smiles thinly.
We passed that when we volunteered. He thinks of the men behind him in the fuselage. Lieutenant Henry Potter, the navigator, charts cluttered with great circles and fuel calculations. Sergeant Fred Bramer, the bombardier, cradling the Norden bomb site, its lenses covered, its secrets protected. Sergeant Paul Leonard, the gunner, fingers resting on the grips of the .50 caliber Brownings in the tail, eyes already scanning for enemy fighters that aren't there yet. They know the odds. The plan is simple but brutal. Launch from the Hornet, bomb industrial and military targets in Tokyo and other Japanese cities, then fly on to airfields in free China. There is no plan to return to the carrier. No space. No fuel. Once they leave this deck, they're committed to a one-way run. Forward, the first B-25 in line taxis into position, its nose hanging over the very edge of the deck. A white line is painted across the planks. Cross that, and there's no stopping. The air boss's voice barks over the radio. Plane 1, you are cleared for takeoff. Engines roar to full power. The bomber shudders against its chocks. Then the chocks are yanked away. The aircraft lurches forward, wheels bouncing on the uneven deck as the Hornet plows into another wave. Spray blasts across the windshield. For a breathless moment, it looks wrong. Too slow, too heavy, too short a run. The bomber reaches the bow just as the ship's nose dips into a trough. The B-25 seems to drop with it, vanishing in a haze of spray. Men on deck hold their breath. Then the bomber claws its way back into view, lifting out of the sea mist, wheels dangling for a heartbeat before snapping up. The B-25 banks slightly left, stabilizes, and begins the long climb west, toward Japan. Doolittle exhales. One has made it. His turn is coming. He wraps his gloved hand around the throttles and looks ahead at the short, wet strip that separates him from the open Pacific and from the heart of the Japanese Empire. Somewhere on those distant islands, Zero pilots still mock American bombers over cigarettes and rice bowls. In a few hours, the thump of B-25 engines over Tokyo will wipe their smiles off their faces. Ready? He asks. Cole nods. Let's go wake them up.
Doolittle's bomber jolts forward, engines screaming at maximum power. The Hornet bucks again, and the nose of the Mitchell points straight into the yawning morning sea. Salt water blasts the windows. The runway disappears beneath them. For a heartbeat, gravity wins. The B-25 sinks, then surges upward, wings biting into the wind. Doolittle eases back on the yoke, letting the bomber climb. The Hornet shrinks behind him, an impossible sight, a floating fortress that isn't meant to be launching land bombers. Below, gray ocean stretches forever. Ahead, the Empire of Japan. Hours pass in icy monotony. The Pacific wind howls against the fuselage. The engines drone a constant reminder, keep running, keep running. The fuel gauges tick downward. There is no turning back. Around them, the other 15 B-25s fan out across the horizon, each crew alone in a vast sky. At 12:15 p.m., the faint outline of the Japanese coastline materializes through haze. Industrial stacks, rice paddies, train lines threading inland. Finally, Japan. Doolittle radios his crew. Bomb bay doors, open. The metallic clatter echoes through the fuselage. Inside the bay hang 4 500-pound messages carved in steel. 2 incendiaries, 2 high explosives, each labeled for a target, the factories of the rising sun. Meanwhile, at an airfield outside Tokyo, a group of Imperial Japanese Navy pilots lounge beside their fighters. Zeros, sleek, agile, beloved by the men who fly them. Ground crews' white canopies to mirror clarity. Engines sparkle under careful maintenance. A pilot smirks as he flicks ash from a cigarette. His comrades chuckle. For months, Propaganda has reassured them. American bombers are too slow, too far away, too weak to threaten the sacred homeland. Air raid sirens explode into life, a rising, wailing shock across the base. Pilots snap to their feet, mechanics scatter, the flight line becomes a hive of urgent shouting. Enemy aircraft, unknown type, approaching from the east. The Zero pilots exchange incredulous looks. Impossible. No bomber can reach Tokyo. But as they scramble into cockpits, engines whining to life, something strange echoes across the city. The deep, throaty thrum, 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 thrum of twin radials. Not Japanese, not Zero engines, something heavier. Flying low over Tokyo Bay, Doolittle's bomber crosses the shoreline. Smoke from industrial chimneys curls around the wings. Roads teem with trucks and bicycles. Civilians look up, confused, curious. No one runs, no one hides. Japan has never seen foreign bombers over its own capital. Sergeant Bramer lies prone over the bomb site, eye to lens. His voice is calm. Target in view, manufacturing district ahead, steady. Cole keeps the bomber level as anti-aircraft guns wake from their slumber. First a few scattered pops, then volleys of black bursts rising fast. Bramer inhales. Bombs, away! The Mitchell leaps upward as the 4 bombs drop free, whistling downward into smoke and steel. A heartbeat. Then, flashes ripple across the industrial yard below. Flames blossom like orange flowers, roaring outward. Tokyo has just been hit. Over the radio, other crews report their strikes. B-25 sweeping over Yokohama, thundering past factories, bombs smashing into oil storage tanks and power stations, incendiaries igniting wooden districts that aren't built to resist fire. Air raid sirens rise into chaos. Cars crash into each other as terrified civilians flood the streets. Above it all, the American bombers roar on, too fast to intercept, too high for ground guns to track accurately, and already banking away before the confused Japanese pilots can engage. In a control bunker beneath Tokyo, orders fly like bullets. How did they reach us? What type of bomber is that? How many? Where is the Navy? Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto stares at a map, jaw clenched, eyes darkened. He had warned them. Japan's strategy assumed its islands could never be touched. Now that illusion burns with every rising plume of smoke. He whispers, almost to himself, "I knew America would strike back, but not here, not so soon." As flak bursts pepper the sky, one Japanese pilot finally spots a B-25 closing on a rail yard. He banks hard, Zero slicing through sunlight like a silver blade. He lines up behind the bomber, finger tightening on the trigger. But the Americans are already diving away, racing west toward China, too low and too fast for him to close the distance. He watches helplessly as the foreign machine vanishes into the mainland haze. His heart pounds, not from the chase, but from a stark new truth. Japan is not untouchable. The Americans can strike the Emperor's doorstep, and worse, they will come again. Inside Doolittle's cockpit, the city shrinks behind them. Smoke rises like funeral incense into the pale afternoon sky. Cole exhales, shaky but smiling. "Well, sir, we sure woke them up." Doolittle nods, though the satisfaction is brief. The hard part is still ahead. Finding China with nearly empty fuel tanks and no safe place to land. But for now, they have changed the war. In Tokyo, disbelief is already turning to rage. The consequences of that rage will reshape the Pacific.
The coastline of Japan fades behind them, smoke still rising in the distance, but ahead lies only the ocean, mountains, and uncertainty. Inside the cockpit, Doolittle taps the fuel gauge. It barely twitches. Every crewman knows the truth. Launching 200 miles early means they are all running on hope. The wind strengthens, rain spits across the windshield. Clouds build, dark, rolling, and ruthless. Navigator Hank Potter spreads maps across his lap, pencil racing. He calculates, recalculates, and then quietly tears up the first 2 sheets. The numbers refuse to change. "We won't make the planned airfields," he says. "Not enough fuel, not enough daylight, not enough luck." Doolittle absorbs the words without a reaction. He knew when he volunteered. He knew when he throttled forward on that carrier deck. Then we fly west, he decides, as far as fate gives us. Hours grind by. Turbulence tosses the Mitchell like a toy. Engines cough and sputter as the mixture leans dry. The crews of the other B-25s fight their own battles. Storms, dead reckoning, silent radios. Some pass over towns where Chinese civilians wave excitedly, unaware that the bombers are seconds from falling out of the sky. Clouds cradle Doolittle's aircraft in a suffocating gray cocoon. Potter finally looks up, face pale. "Sir, fuel is gone." Cole squeezes the yoke. "We bail?" Doolittle nods once. He pulls back slightly, trying to give his men a fighting chance. "Prepare to abandon ship." The crew rushes through the cramped fuselage, opening the overhead hatch, tugging on parachute straps with trembling fingers. The bomber groans, metal straining as altitude bleeds away. The Atlantic wind of the morning is now a screaming gale over China. One by one, they leap through the hatch into howling darkness. Cold air tears at their uniforms. Silk canopies snap open above them like thunder. The earth below is invisible, mountains hidden beneath black clouds. Doolittle is last to jump. He rests a gloved hand on the throttle, just for a second, a goodbye to the machine that carried them across 2 seas. Then he launches himself into the storm. Behind him, the first B-25 he flew into combat pitches downward, engines finally silent, disappearing forever into the rain-filled night. In the distance, another crew isn't as lucky. Pilot Captain Ted Lawson's plane slams into the surf near Changchu, breaking apart in seconds. Men drag their wounded bombardier, Dave Thatcher, onto the beach. He is bleeding badly, skin torn by glass and metal. But they live. Barely. Elsewhere, B-25 40-2261 lands in a rice paddy, gears snapping under the sudden stop. Its crew scrambles out as locals rush toward them, some eager to help, some unsure if these foreigners are friend or foe. Other bombers vanish completely, swallowed by mountains or the sea. The mission continues to extract its price. Doolittle's parachute swings violently as he descends. Below, voices shout in Chinese. His boots slam into muddy earth, ankle-wrenching, breath ripped from his chest. He lies still, rain pounding on his helmet. The world spins, then settles. A lantern appears, held by villagers wrapped in soaked wool. For a tense moment, Doolittle reaches for his pistol, but the villagers instead kneel, helping him to his feet. He nods gratefully. "Thank you, thank you." They cannot understand his words, but they understand his fight. They will hide him, protect him, risk everything, because the enemy is the same. By dawn, Doolittle reunites with his crew, alive, though battered. One mission, 16 bombers, all lost. None of the 80 men knew if their strike had mattered. They had bombed Tokyo, yes, but the real goal had been psychological, to show Japan that the war could reach its shores. And as Doolittle looked east toward the rising sun, he feared history might remember it as a daring failure, a raid that achieved little beyond sacrifice. He couldn't see Tokyo now, but Tokyo could still see the smoke, and that smoke would change everything.
Tokyo's skyline still smolders. Black plumes drift over the imperial palace. Firefighters battle blazes with bucket lines, water sloshing in wooden pails, utterly insufficient. The raid has ended, but the real impact is only beginning. Inside Japan's war rooms, fury erupts like artillery fire. How did American planes reach the homeland? Where was our early warning? This is an outrage, an embarrassment. Generals argue, admirals deflect blame. The emperor is shaken. And in the middle of the storm stands Admiral Yamamoto, face expressionless, voice cold. "I warned you," he says. "The Americans are unpredictable, capable of the impossible." The Japanese Navy's vaunted defensive perimeter, thousands of miles of water, has been breached. Fear spreads through the Japanese public. If the capital can be bombed, what next? More raids? Invasion? Confidence shatters. The Japanese military high command responds with brutal speed and cruelty. First, retaliation against China, because Chinese resistance had sheltered the American crews, not that Japan cares what is true. They launch Operation Seigo, a campaign of terror. Thousands of Chinese civilians are murdered. Entire villages are burned. Hospitals treating American airmen are wiped out. Patients and doctors executed. The Doolittle Raid proved Japan was vulnerable, but it was Chinese civilians who suffered first for that revelation. Second, Japan must strike back at the Americans decisively, not a symbolic attack, a crushing blow that will keep the U.S. on its heels. The target? Midway Atoll, a tiny flat spit of coral northwest of Hawaii, seemingly insignificant, but its capture would lure the U.S. Pacific Fleet into a decisive trap. Japan envisions total annihilation of American carrier power. 4 first-line fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, are assigned. The might of the Imperial Navy is directed toward one purpose: erase America's ability to strike again. The message is clear. Tokyo must never be humiliated again. But the Japanese High Command fails to understand something crucial. To the American people, the Doolittle Raid is a miracle. News of the mission spreads like wildfire across radios and newspapers. American bombers strike Tokyo, Japan's capital hit for first time in history. The U.S. doesn't mention how little physical damage was caused, or that every bomber was lost. None of that matters. The nation needed hope, and hope came in roaring Wright R-2600 engines over Tokyo. Jimmy Doolittle fears a court-martial for losing all 16 bombers. Instead, he receives the Medal of Honor. The raiders become heroes, symbols of resilience and daring. The raid doesn't just strike Tokyo. It strikes the enemy's confidence. It strikes their strategy. It strikes the course of the war itself. And now, because of that strike, the Japanese fleet is steaming toward an island called Midway, where the United States Navy is waiting. The Doolittle Raid was the spark. Midway will be the inferno.
June 4th, 1942. Midway Atoll. Dawn breaks across the Pacific like a blade slicing open the sky. The water glitters, calm, too calm. On Japanese carrier decks, mechanics and armorers swarm around torpedo bombers and dive bombers, Zero fighters circling overhead like the sharp teeth of a saw. Admiral Chuichi Nagumo watches the horizon, confident. After Tokyo's humiliation, today will restore pride. Destroy America's carriers, crush its naval power, erase the threat of more raids. But something is wrong. The Americans aren't surprised. They are waiting. Miles away, on the bridge of USS Enterprise, Admiral Raymond Spruance stands steady, his face lit by the glow of radar screens and early sun.
Thanks to U.S. codebreakers cracking Japanese operational plans, he already knows where the enemy is coming from, knows the date, knows the target, knows the trap is set. American SPD Dauntless dive bombers climb into the sky, their pilots tense, jaws set. The radio crackles, proceed to vector, find the fleet. They fly, low oxygen, high stakes, one chance. The battle begins in fragments. Waves of American torpedo bombers, slow and vulnerable, push through walls of Zero fighters. VT-8, VT-6, VT-3. They fly straight into death. Planes burn and splash into the sea. Air crews die with unwavering resolve. Not one torpedo finds a target. Japanese gunners cheer. Nagumo looks skyward, victorious, believing he has turned the tide. But in trying to swap the torpedo planes, every Zero has been dragged low, away from the sky's upper reaches. And that is where the real blow is coming. At 10:22 a.m., shadows streak across the Japanese carriers. Dozens of dauntless dive bombers from Enterprise and Yorktown roll into near-vertical plunges. Sirens wail through cockpits. The ocean spins. Bomb bays open, and the first American bomb hits the flight deck of Akagi. Then another slams into Kaga. Then Soryu. Explosions rip across the carrier group like a chain reaction. Pilots and deck crews vanish in fireballs. Bomb-laden aircraft erupt into towering infernos. Nagumo's sailors stare in shock, their pride, their confidence, all burning away. In Akagi's command center, flames roar down corridors. Smoke chokes every passage. Officers shout and stumble, eyes wide with disbelief. This isn't just defeat, it's disaster. By sunset, 3 Japanese carriers are gone, their wrecks slipping beneath the waves. The 4th, Hiryu, launches a desperate counterattack, damaging USS Yorktown. But American dive bombers find Hiryu too. She becomes a smoldering ruin by nightfall. 4 first-line fleet carriers destroyed, hundreds of elite pilots lost, the offensive spirit of the Imperial Japanese Navy extinguished. Yamamoto stares into the Black Ocean from his flagship cruiser, Yamato. He has lost the irreplaceable core of his carrier force. All because Tokyo was bombed. All because he sought revenge. All because of 16 B-25s launched from a pitching carrier deck on a gray April morning. The war will continue, long, brutal, unforgiving. But the tide has turned. Japan is now on defense. America advances, island by island, toward ultimate victory. Far from Midway, in China, Jimmy Doolittle and the survivors of his raid gather months later. They raise glasses in memory of those who didn't return, men who risked everything on a mission that many once doubted. Doolittle looks around at his raiders, scarred, proud, unbroken. He doesn't have to explain it to them. They already know. Their flight didn't just wake Japan. It shook their entire strategy apart. Tokyo mocked American bombers, but the sound of B-25 engines over the capital was the beginning of Japan's fall. The Doolittle Raid was small in size, but colossal in consequence. One daring strike, one ember, one act of audacity that ignited a turning point in the Pacific War.